Hey guys, come on in. Welcome back to That's Life with John Carver. Today I want to share some thoughts with you actually on a book that was written, 60, 70, 80 years ago. I can't remember the exact date. A book called How to Win Friends and Influence People. It has been a dynamic book that has influenced a lot of people's lives. In fact, the book was written by a guy named Dale Carnegie. He invested years of his life mastering and learning from people that are way smarter than him. So today I want to share some of his words. I cannot remember all of them. It's a very thick book, jam full of information. But I'm hoping that some of the information I want to share today in this show is going to give you some tools that can help you learn how to win friends. So I want to share three ideas here in this piece of the show. He says the first one is don't criticize, don't condemn, and don't complain. Think about this a minute. Don't criticize, don't condemn, or complain, because all of those things will in fact tear you down. And then when you get tear down, you're also tearing down other people in the words that you speak. He says principle number 2, give honest and sincere appreciation. You know how hard it is to find something good to say about somebody who is full of nastiness, who's full of negativity, who's full of words that just want to tear people down, and maybe words that attack you in several different ways. And principle 3, he says, now there's dozens of them, but the top 3 are arouse in the other person an eager want. Now that gets really deep into psychology, but you have the power in the words that you speak to be able to bring out the best in people that maybe they don't know that you're doing something to help them. Let me just jump into this story and some of these concepts that I'm still trying to master. I'm still trying to remember them because it's so much information. Again, just pieces of the book, How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. He says, do this and you'll be welcome anywhere. Why read this book to find out how to win friends? Why not study the technique of the greatest winner of friends the world has ever seen? Who is he? You may meet him tomorrow coming down the street. When you get within 10 feet of him, you will begin to get very excited about it. If you stop and pat him, you almost jump out of his skin. And you know what? Behind this show of affection, all this part, there are no ulterior motives, it says. He doesn't want to sell you any real estate, and he doesn't want to marry you. Did you ever stop to think that a dog is the only animal that doesn't have to work for a living? A hen has to lay eggs. A cow has to give milk. A canary has to sing, but a dog makes his living, listen, a dog makes his living by giving you nothing but love. Think about that a minute. When I was 5 years old, my father bought a little yellow-haired pup for 50 cents. We're talking a long time ago. He was the light and joy of my childhood. Every afternoon, about 4:30, he would sit in the front yard with his beautiful eyes staring steadfastly at the path. And as soon as he heard my voice or saw me swinging my dinner pail through the back brush, he was off like a shot, racing breathlessly up the hill to greet me with leaps of joy and barks of sheer ecstasy. Tippy was my constant companion for 5 years. Then one tragic night, I shall never forget it. He was killed within 10 feet of my head, killed by lightning. Tippy's death was the tragedy of my childhood. You never read a book on psychology. You never read a book on psychology. You didn't need to. You knew by some divine instinct that you can make more friends in 2 months by becoming genuinely interested in other people than you can in 2 years by trying to get other people interested in you. Let me pause this summary for a minute. Let me repeat it again. You can have more people, you can gain more friends when you become interested in other people than trying to get other people interested in you. He goes on. Yet I know, and you know people who blunder through life trying to wigwag other people into becoming interested in them. Of course, it doesn't work. People are not interested in you. They are not interested in me. They're interested in themselves morning, noon, and after dinner. Let me just pause this and share this concept in a bigger way. When you are more interested in other people, psychologically, people are drawn to you. When you ask questions about other people, guess what? They are attracted to you. When you care more about other people than you want people to care about you, then they are attracted to you. Again, today's theme is very small parts of the book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. His story continues. He said, the New York Telephone Company made a detailed study of telephone conversations to find out which word is most frequently used. You have guessed it. It is the personal pronoun I. It was used 3,900 times in 500 telephone conversations. I. When you see a group photograph that you're in, whose picture do you look for first? Look for yours, right? If you merely try to impress people and get people interested in us, listen, if you merely try to impress people and get people interested in us, you will never have many true, sincere friends. Friends, real friends, are people, and they're not made up that way. Napoleon tried it, he says. And it's the last meeting with Josephine. He said, Josephine, I have been as fortunate as any man here on earth. And yet at this hour, you are the only person in the world to whom I can really rely on. And historians doubt whether he could even really rely on her. Alfred Adler, the famous psychologist, wrote a book entitled What Life Should Mean to You. In that book, he says, it is the individual who is not interested in his fellow men, who has the greatest difficulties in life and provides the greatest injury to others. It is from among such individuals that all human failings spring. I know that's a lot. Let me share it again, slow it down just a little bit. It is the individual who is not interested in his fellow men, who has the greatest difficulties in life and provides the greatest injury to others. It is from among such individuals that all human failings spring. What this piece of the book is sharing is that when you and I are more interested in other people, people are attracted to you. People are attracted to what you're trying to get across when you're interested in them first. You may read stories, he says, scores of stories on psychology without coming across a statement more significant for you and for me. Adler's statement is so rich with meaning that I'm going to repeat it in italics, and then he repeats what I just repeated twice. He says, I once took a course in short story writing in New York University. And during that course, the editor of a leading magazine talked to our class. He said he could pick up any one of the dozens of stories that drifted across his desk every day, and after reading just a few paragraphs, he could feel whether or not the author liked people. If the author doesn't like people, he said, people won't like his or her stories. You know, you're not an island and I'm not an island. So if you really want to impress people and get ahead in life, you need to be more interested in other people than you want people to be interested in you. I've used this hundreds of times and it does work. The story goes on. This hard-boiled editor stopped twice in the course of his talk on fiction writing and apologized for preaching a sermon. I am telling you, he said, the same things your preacher would tell you, but remember, you have to be interested in people. Listen, you have to be interested in people if you want to be a successful writer of stories. Be more interested, I'm saying it 100 times, be more interested in other people. If that is true of writing fiction, you can be assured dealing with people face to face. He goes on. I spent an evening in the dressing room of Howard Thurston the last time he appeared on Broadway. Thurston was the acknowledged dean of magicians. For 40 years, he had traveled all over the world time and time again, creating illusions, mystifying audiences, and making people gasp with astonishment. More than 60 million people have paid admission to his show, and he has made almost $2 million in profit. I asked Mr. Thurston to tell me the secret of his success. His schooling certainly had nothing to do with it, for he ran away from home as a small boy, became a hobo, rode in boxcars, slept in haystacks, begged his food from door to door, and learned by reading by looking out of boxcars at signs along the railway. Did he have superior knowledge of magic? No, he told me hundreds of books had been written about these guys and scores of people knew as much as he did. But he had two things that the other people didn't have. Listen to this. First, he had the ability to put his personality across the footlights on stage. He was a master showman. He knew human nature. Everything he did, every gesture, every intonation of his voice, every lifting of an eyebrow has been carefully rehearsed in advance. He says all his actions were timed to a split second. But in addition to that, listen, Thurston had a genuine interest in other people. He told me that many magicians would look at the audience and say to themselves, wow, there's a bunch of suckers out there, a bunch of hicks. I'll fool them all night. But listen to this. But Thurston's method was totally different. He told me that every time he went on stage, he said to himself, quote, I am grateful because these people came to see me. They make it possible for me to make my living in a very agreeable way. I'm going to give them the very best I possibly can. He declared he never stepped in front of the footlights without first saying to himself over and over, I love my audience, I love my audience. Ridiculous, absurd. You are privileged to think anything you like. I am merely passing it on to you without comment as a recipe used by one of the most famous magicians of all time. Again, he said, I love my audience. I love my audience. So when your attention is more focused on the well-being of other people, guess what happens? Then people are drawn to you in a dramatic way. People are drawn to you in a dramatic way. Gale Dyke of North Warren, Pennsylvania, was forced to retire from his service station, his gas station, after 30 years when a new highway was constructed over the site. It wasn't long before the idle days of retirement began to bore him, so he started filling his time playing music with an old fiddle. Soon he was traveling in the area and listening to music and talk with many other accomplished fiddlers. In his humble and friendly way, he became generally interested in learning the background and interest of every musician he met. Although he was not a great fiddler himself, he made many friends in his pursuit. He attended competitions and soon became known to the country music fans all over the United States. Uncle George, the fiddler scrapper from this county, when we heard Uncle George, he was 72 and enjoying every minute of his life. By having a sustained interest in other people, he created a new life for himself when most people consider their productive years over. Why? Again, because he was focused on lifting other people up. When you and I choose to focus on lifting other people up, guess what? People are drawn to you because they care about themselves. They don't care about you. They don't care about me. They care about themselves. That too was one of the secrets of Theodore Roosevelt's astonishing popularity. Even his servants loved him. His valet, James Amos, wrote a book about him entitled Theodore Roosevelt, Hero to the Valet. In that book, Amos relates an illuminating incident. Listen, my wife one time asked the president about a bobwhite. She had never seen one, and he described it to her fully. Sometime later, the telephone at our cottage rang. Amos and his wife lived in a little cottage on the Roosevelt estate at Oyster Bay. His wife answered it, and it was Mr. Roosevelt himself. He had called her, he said, to tell her that there was a bobwhite outside her window and that if she would look at it, she would look out, she might see it. Little things like that were so characteristic of him. Whenever he went out to our cottage, even though we were out of sight, we would hear him call out, "Oh, Annie, oh, James," and it was just a friendly greeting as he went by. This is Theodore Roosevelt, President Theodore Roosevelt. He could keep employees, rather he could keep him, tough one today. How could employees keep from liking a man like that? How could anyone keep from liking him? Roosevelt called at the White House one day when the president and Mrs. Taft were away. His honest liking for humble people was shown by the fact that he greeted all the old White House servants by name, even the maids. Nobody was beneath him. Maybe there's a lesson somewhere in these words that nobody is beneath you and me. Everybody is important. When he saw Alice, the kitchen maid, writes Archie Butt, he asked her if she still made cornbread. Alice told him that she sometimes made it for the servants, but no one ate it upstairs. They show bad taste, Roosevelt boomed, and I'll tell the president so when I see him. Alice brought a piece to him on a plate, and he went over to the office, eating it as if he had went greeting gardeners and laborers as he passed by. He addressed each person just as he had addressed them in the past. Ike Hoover, who had been head usher at the White House for 40 years, said with tears in his eyes, "It is the only happy day we had in nearly 2 years, and not one of us would exchange it for a $100 bill." We're talking in the early 1900s here, okay? The same concern for the seemingly unimportant, the same concern for the seemingly unimportant people helped sales representative Edward Sykes of New Jersey retain an account. Many years ago, he reported, "I called on customers for Johnson & Johnson in the Massachusetts area. One account was a drugstore in another town. Whenever I went into this store, I would always talk to the soda clerk and the sales clerk for a few minutes before talking to the owner to obtain his order. One day I went up to the owner of the store and he told me to leave, and he was not interested in buying Johnson & Johnson products anymore because he felt they were concentrating their activities on food and discount stores to the detriment of the small drugstore. I left with my tail between my legs and drove around the town for several hours. Finally, I decided to go back and at least try to explain our position to the store owner. When I returned, I walked in and said hello to the soda clerk and sales clerk, and well, when I walked up to the owner, the story says, he smiled at me and welcomed me back. He then gave me double the usual order. I looked at him with surprise and asked him what had happened since my visit only a few hours earlier. He pointed to the young man at the soda fountain and said that after I left, the boy came over and said that I was one of the few salespeople that called on the store, that even bothered to say hello and hello to the others in the store. He told the owner that if any salesperson deserved the business, it was I. It was that guy. The owner agreed and remained a loyal customer. I never forgo to be genuinely interested in other people, and a most important quality for a salesperson to possess, for any person for that matter. Again, be genuinely interested in other people, and people will be attracted to you. Don't fake it. Don't try to blow smoke up their nose. I'm not saying that at all. Be genuinely interested in other people. Let me just digress. If you remember Bill Clinton, President Bill Clinton, he was late all the time. That was one of his reputations, for being late. And one of the reasons why he was late all the time is because that he chose to hang around and be genuinely interested in other people. He would get into conversations that went really long because he became genuinely interested in other people. He learned that tool that when you and I become genuinely interested in other people, people are attracted to you. So I think this model, whether, it's actually several thousand years old, it's not anything new, but maybe for you it's something that you may not have thought about before. That if you're wondering why people aren't attracted to you or why you can't make friends, maybe this concept will ring a bell in your head that when you're more interested in other people, I'll say it 100 times, more or less, people will be more interested in you. The story continues. Years ago, I conducted a course on fiction writing at the Brooklyn Institute of Arts and Sciences, and wanted such a distinguished and busy authors of like Kathleen Norris and Fannie Hurst and Ida Tarbell and others. Each of these letters was signed by 100 plus students, and they realized that maybe that they wanted these other authors to come in and share their wisdom. So by this time they came in and did their talk. So all of us, be we workers in a factory, he says, or clerks in an office, or even maybe a king of a throne somewhere in some country, all of us like people who admire us. It's human nature sometimes. Take the German Kaiser, for example. Again, this is 100 plus years ago this book was written. At the close of World War I, he was probably the most savagely and universally despised man on this earth. Again, World War I, Germany was the bad guy. Even his own nation turned against him when he fled over into Holland to save his neck. The hatred against him was so intense that millions of people would have loved to tear him limb from limb at the stake. And in the midst of all this, he was just hated by everybody. But the Kaiser wrote this little letter of kindness and admiration. And this little boy said that no matter what others thought, he would always love Wilhelm as his emperor. The Kaiser was deeply touched by his letter and invited the little boy to come see him. The boy came, and so did his mother, and the Kaiser married her, actually. The little boy didn't need to read a book on how to win friends and influence people. He just knew distinctively that people just want to be loved. People just wanted to be recognized. How many times haven't you just paid a little attention to somebody who, frankly, everybody ignores, or most people ignore, and that just lifts their self-esteem, and then they're drawn to you to think that you're the best human being on the planet. He goes on in his book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. For years, I have made a point to find out the birthdays of my friends. How? Although I haven't the foggiest bit of faith in astronomy, I began by asking the other party whether he believed the date of one's birth has anything to do with their character. So he tried to try to remember people's birthdays. And as he remembered people's birthdays, people were just blown away that this famous guy, Dale Carnegie, very wealthy, knew a lot of wealthy people, cared enough to remember their birthdays. He goes on, if we want to make friends, let's greet people, listen, with animation and enthusiasm. Again, if we want to make friends, let's greet people with animation and enthusiasm. Is that easy some days? No. Is it difficult? Yeah. Is it frustrating sometimes to kind of be positive when you don't feel like being positive? Absolutely. I still struggle with that. He says, when somebody calls you on the telephone, use the same psychology. Say hello in tones that are pleasing to the person on the other line. Most companies train their telephone operators to greet all callers in a tone of voice that radiates interest and enthusiasm. The caller feels the company is concerned about them. Let's remember that when we answer the phone tomorrow, how many times haven't you called someone hello and said hello or hello, hi? Positive. The attitude, the air in which you carry yourself will attract people to you or deflect people away from you. I would like you to know how much I appreciate your staff. Everyone is so courteous and politeful. He tells about another story with a bank in New York. Again, when you care more about people, the words you use are going to be impactful in their people's lives, and then they're going to be attracted to your kindness because you care a lot about them. Charles Walters, one of the largest banks in New York, was assigned to prepare a confidential report to some corporation. He knew of only one person who possessed the facts he needed so urgently. As Mr. Walters was ushered into the president's office, a young woman stuck her head around the door and told the president that she didn't have any stamps for him that day. I'm collecting stamps for my 20-year-old son, the president explained to Mr. Walters. Mr. Walters stated his mission and began asking questions. The president was vague and generally dubious. He didn't want to talk. Apparently nothing could persuade him to talk, so the interview was kind of brief and barren. I know you've had conversations with people that they're not saying a whole lot. Been there, done that, and I've been not very talkative to some people many days. Frankly, I didn't know what to do, the story says. Mr. Walters said, as he related the story to the class, then I remembered what his secretary had said to him, stamps, 12-year-old son. And I also recalled that the foreign department of our bank collected stamps from letters pouring in from all over the world. The next afternoon, I called on this man and sent in word that I had some stamps for his boy, his son. Was I ushered in with enthusiasm? Yes, sir. He couldn't have shaken my hand with more enthusiasm if he had been running for Congress. He radiated smiles and goodwill. My George will love this one, he kept saying as he looked at the stamps. And look at this. This is a treasure. We spent half an hour talking about stamps and looking at pictures of his boy. And he then devoted more than an hour of his time to give me every bit of information I wanted without even suggesting that he do it. He told me all that I needed to know, and then called on his subordinates and questioned them. He even telephoned some of them. He loaded me down with facts and figures and reports and every newspaper I need. I had all the information I needed. Why? Because he became interested in his son, which then became interested in him, which opened doors of opportunity. He was genuine about it. He wasn't faking it. So if you want to make friends and have people interested in you, then leverage some of the words that I've shared on the show today from Dale Carnegie 100 years ago or so, that if you're more interested in other people, then people will be more interested in you. Thanks for watching That's Life with John Carver. I really appreciate it.